Here at AF, we know filament. Your 3D printer is only as reliable as what you feed it. With over 2 decades of 3D printing experience, we use sustainable manufacturing to deliver high-quality American-made products. Print your next project strong AF with American filament, direct from the Rocket City.
I'm Taylor Heron, and you're watching American Filament TV. Have you ever wondered if you could 3D print dishes like plates, bowls, cups, cutlery? Maybe you saw a forum post online where people were talking about food-safe 3D printer filament or how to print food-safe parts. Or maybe you saw an ad online for food-safe 3D printer filament or FDA-compliant 3D printer filament and you wondered, what exactly does that even mean? But is filament actually food safe, and can 3D printed parts be food safe? First, let's talk about what does it mean for something to actually be food safe. Here in the United States, food safety is overseen by the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. So there are 3 definitions that it's important to understand. The first is food grade. Food grade refers specifically to a material, and it means that material is either safe for human consumption or is safe to come into direct contact with food. For a material to be food grade, it must be able to be cleaned effectively, meaning that it must be free from cracks, ridges, crevices, or other surface imperfections where bacteria or food particulate could get trapped. The second definition is food safe. Food safe refers to a product. And a product is said to be food safe when it is made from food grade materials and is suitable to withstand the environment in which it is intended to be used. For a product to be food safe, it must be able to withstand repetitive cleaning, sanitizing, and exposure to cleaning products such as bleach, for example. The third and final definition it's important to understand is a little bit more complicated to define than food grade or food safe. And it is a food contact substance, or FCS for short. So for this one, I'm just going to read the definition straight from the FDA first. A food contact substance is any substance that is intended for use as a component of materials used in manufacturing, packing, packaging, transporting, or holding food if such use of the substance is not intended to have any technical effect in such food. Basically, a food contact substance is a material that has been designed to come into direct contact with food during food processing or packaging and is safe to come into contact with said food, not have an effect on the food, and is designed to withstand the environment in which it is intended to be used. So what does all this have to do with 3D printing? Well, as a 3D printer, you have 2 things. You are using a product, the 3D printer filament, and you are creating a product, your 3D printed part. So when talking about a product, whether that be your filament or your 3D printed part, when talking about the food safety of a product, there are 3 factors that go into that. There is material, method of manufacture, and intended use. So let's talk about the 3D printer filament first. Is 3D printer filament food safe? Are there food safe 3D printer filaments, etc.? So let's take our PLA Plus for example. It's made from PLA resin, and if you research is PLA food safe online, you'll find a lot of people talking about whether it is or whether it isn't food safe. A lot of people will say, oh yeah, PLA is considered to be a food safe product. It's used in food packaging, so therefore PLA filament should be food safe. But it's not that simple. The PLA resin that we use is NGO 4043D PLA resin, and it is on the FDA's list of effective food contact substances for food packaging and processing equipment. So PLA will get used in sheet extrusion or film extrusion to make stuff like candy wrappers, for example, or it'll get used to make disposable cup lids, sometimes cutlery, that kind of thing. And in that specific use case, the material, the PLA, is considered food grade to create a food safe product. So if, PLA in general is not food grade, what is? Are there food grade 3D printable materials? Yes. One example being HIPS, high impact polystyrene. There are grades of HIPS resin that are suitable as a food grade material for use to make a food safe 3D printer filament. And that brings us to our next talking point of method of manufacture. It is the responsibility of the manufacturer to follow FDA compliant good manufacturing processes, or GMP, when creating a food safe product. And then you have intended use. Like I talked about in the definition, when you have a product that's food safe, it's not always necessarily food safe in every single scenario. So yes, there are certain 3D printer filaments that are food safe products. It is possible to create a food safe 3D printer filament. And that brings us to our next topic, which is 3D printed parts. Can you take a food safe 3D printer filament and use your average at-home FDM printer and make food safe parts? And just like with the filament, it's not that simple. So as a 3D printer, somebody making 3D printed parts, you have the same three factors to be worried about as, say somebody manufacturing 3D printer filament. When you make a product, you have material, method of manufacture, and intended use. So even if you start with a food safe material, food safe 3D printer filament, that doesn't necessarily mean that your 3D printed part is just going to be food safe, for a few reasons. Let's start with the easiest first. Earlier when I talked about the definition for food grade, I talked about how for a material to be food grade, it must be easily cleaned or easy to clean. And an FDM 3D printed part is essentially the antithesis to being easy to clean, because it has all kinds of surface imperfections, layer lines, Z-seam, you'll get gaps in your bottom or top surface layers. You have to take a lot of special care and use special settings to get parts that are watertight, that kind of thing. So for your typical 3D printed part, it's essentially going to be a petri dish for bacteria to grow, get stuck in the layer lines, and that kind of thing. Not only that, that's your material. You also have your method of manufacture. On your typical, 3D printer, you're going to have a brass nozzle. Most brass nozzles have small amounts of lead in them, so you're going to end up with trace amounts of lead in your 3D printed part. And then if you're not using an all-metal hot end that has a PTFE Bowden tube in it, PTFE can off-gas and leach toxic chemicals into your filament when heated above certain temperatures. And then, most people keep their 3D printer in a workshop, a garage, an office, not somewhere that's conducive to creating food-safe products. Your printer is going to be exposed to things like solvents, adhesives, lubricants, oils, greases, etc. All things that are going to, potentially introduce hazardous chemicals or toxins to your product. For your typical at-home 3D printing setup, it's not as simple as slapping food-safe filament on your printer and making a food-safe part. So can you make food-safe 3D printed parts at home? Yes, you can, and it's actually not that difficult. The easiest method, the most reliable method, is to just 3D print your part and then get a good quality food-safe epoxy and coat the surfaces of your part in food-safe epoxy. And as long as you make sure you get a nice even coating without surface imperfections, bubbles, gaps, cracks, that kind of thing, and you follow the instructions set out by the epoxy manufacturer, you're going to end up with a food-safe 3D printed part. Specifically, it is important to follow the instructions of the manufacturer of the epoxy, because A lot of epoxies are actually super toxic until they're fully cured. So you got to make sure if you do work with epoxy, you wait for it to fully cure. Some can take a few days to cure before using it for anything with food. And then even with epoxy coated parts, a lot of times, now you're going to get into your third factor, intended use. A lot of the food safe epoxies aren't going to be suitable for use in a dishwasher, microwave, or something that's going to be exposed to sharp metal implements like cutlery. You can scrape the coating, the epoxy off, and your part will no longer be food safe. So 3D printing, food safety. Are there food safe 3D printer filaments? Yes. Just make sure when you're looking at a filament that claims to be food safe that here in the United States it is listed as being FDA compliant. You can look for the food safety symbol and keep in mind that it is possible for companies to get food safety certifications from foreign countries that don't apply here in the US, and they will use that to do deceptive marketing. And can you make food safe 3D printed parts? Yes, you can. And for more information on that, there is actually a video by Prusa on how to coat your parts in epoxy to make epoxy coated food safe parts. So this video had a bunch of technical jargon in it, but I hope it wasn't too confusing. And if you want to make your own giant 3D printed spoon to eat your breakfast cereal with, just make sure you coat it in food safe epoxy before eating with it. Until next time, I've been Taylor Heron.